Having mentioned the COVID inquiry, it may be helpful to emphasise that although both that inquiry and this have been established under the 2005 Act, they are very different beasts indeed. The COVID inquiry, like some other recent inquiries, has a very broad remit to examine whole sections of state activity within an extended time period and to consider wide-ranging recommendations for the future. This inquiry, by contrast, is a targeted investigation into the circumstances, albeit the broad circumstances, surrounding a single event, namely the death of Dawn Sturgess. In substance, you are performing the role of a coroner with the added powers of the chair of a public inquiry, and that is reflected in the inquiry's terms of reference, which are on the screens now. Those terms of reference define your role, sir, in very much the same way as that of a coroner conducting an inquest. You will be familiar, sir, with a number of well-known judicial statements that have been made about the way in which coroners should investigate deaths. In the case of Thompson, Lord Lane stated that, and I quote, "The function of an inquest is to seek out and record as many of the facts concerning the death as the public interest requires." In the case of Jameson, Sir Thomas Bingham, then the Master of the Rolls, referred to the need for a coroner to conduct a full, fair and fearless investigation, and in doing so to, in his words, ensure that the relevant facts are exposed to public scrutiny, particularly if there is evidence of foul play, abuse or inhumanity. And in the later case of Amin, Lord Bingham, as he had by then become, described the purpose of a coronial investigation as being, again in his words, to ensure so far as possible that the full facts are brought to light, that culpable and discreditable conduct is exposed and brought to public notice, that suspicion of deliberate wrongdoing, if unjustified, is allayed, that dangerous practices and procedures are rectified, and that those who have lost their relative may at least have the satisfaction of knowing that lessons learned from her death may save the lives of others. We respectfully submit that all of those principles apply directly to your role as chair of this inquiry. Before I move on from procedural matters, sir, let me address head-on the question that, quite understandably, observers often ask about this case. Why has it all taken so long? It is 6 years since Dawn Sturgess died. That is a long time to wait for answers, especially, of course, for her family. Legal process does take time, and the process I have just described has been a complex one. The coroner spent some time reaching his initial decision on scope. There was then the High Court Judicial Review challenge, the appointment of Baroness Hallett to conduct the inquest, then her rulings on scope, which in turn prompted the conversion to an inquiry and your appointment 2.5 years ago. That is one explanation for the delay. The other distinguishing feature of this case, which has certainly added to the time that it has taken to reach these hearings, is the difficulty and thoroughness of the disclosure process. One of the themes of the guidance of Lord Lane and Lord Bingham that I mentioned a moment ago is that of transparency, the need to expose as much detail as possible, particularly culpable or discreditable conduct, to public scrutiny. The same requirement appears in Section 18 of the 2005 Act. I've already made the point that in this case you will, of necessity, hear some highly sensitive evidence in closed session. The principle of transparency does not prohibit closed evidence, but what it does require is that you only permit evidence to be heard in closed where that is absolutely necessary. It is for that reason, sir, to make the open element of these proceedings as wide as possible and conversely to minimise the content of the closed hearings, that you have spent much of the last 18 months painstakingly reviewing restriction order applications over thousands of documents on a line-by-line basis. There is no question that this process has added considerably to the time that would otherwise have been taken in preparing for these hearings. But that process has been of great value. The result of it, in practical terms, is that we will be able to hear a great deal of evidence about this case in the open, public sessions that are starting today. I now turn to introduce in a little detail the core factual issues that we will be exploring in evidence in the coming weeks. Those are the issues that, at the end of this process, you will address in your report. I've already mentioned some of the issues, and I hope it will be clear from what I've said so far that many of the issues overlap. There is, of course, the inquiry's provisional list of issues. That document is the product of debate at the inquiry's preliminary hearings and subsequent refinement. It's available on the inquiry website. It is a comprehensive document, and I don't propose to read it out. Rather commencing today. Second, the broader factual circumstance, medical treatment, including the adequacy of the medical treatment provided to Dawn Sturgess and the bottle that it was found in. So, was the poisoning of Dawn Sturgess prevent the immediate circumstances of her death? So, in your opening remarks, we must not and we will not lose sight of Dawn Sturgess, the individual, and of her family's grief. Caroline Sturgess, Dawn's mother, will give evidence tomorrow morning. She will provide a pen portrait of Dawn. She will tell us something of the life Dawn enjoyed with her parents, her children, her sisters. We will hear that Dawn grew up and lived almost all her life in and near Salisbury. As a child, she attended Durrington Secondary School. She had a close and supportive family and also a strong network of friends. We will hear evidence from Charlie Rowley, who was Dawn's partner at the time she died, about the life they had been living together for 16 months or so before her death. In an interview that he gave after her death, Charlie Rowley described Dawn as a lovely lady. She had a big heart. She'd help anyone if she could. Dawn's mother has said that Dawn was the happiest she'd been for a long time when she was together with Charlie. Charlie himself has described their relationship as being very happy, supportive and loving. As you will hear, Charlie Rowley was also poisoned by the Novichok. He was hospitalised and suffered serious symptoms. He also, of course, suffered a bereavement. To use his own words in a television interview, "It's my girlfriend I lost, my partner, my soulmate." You will also hear evidence that Dawn suffered from long-term dependence on alcohol, which limited her ability to work and affected her personal life. Her family recall that in the months and weeks before her death, Dawn was showing signs of improvement in her health and well-being. As I've said, she was settled and happy in a romantic relationship. She was looking forward to moving into her own flat in Amesbury, where she would have been close to Charlie. As to the immediate cause and mechanism of Dawn Sturgess's death, Professor Rutty, who conducted the post-mortem and who will be giving oral evidence to you, recorded the cause of death as 1A, post-cardiac arrest, hypoxic brain injury and intracerebral hemorrhage, 1B, Novichok toxicity. In layman's terms, and adding a little detail, the poison caused Dawn's nervous system to become overstimulated, which led to heart failure. That in turn caused Dawn's brain to be starved of oxygen. As we will hear, when paramedics arrived at the scene, they performed CPR and managed to restart her heart. She was taken to hospital and treated for several days. But the damage that had been done to her brain from the lack of oxygen during that initial period gradually developed and worsened over the days that Dawn was in hospital. In the end, as Professor Rutty will explain, it was the brain injury that was the immediate cause of her death. I turn to the second issue, sir, the narrative of broader factual circumstances of the two poisonings, that of the Skripals and that of Dawn Sturgess. And I start with Sergei and Julia Skripal. In 2018, Sergei Skripal was a Russian man in his mid-60s, living in Christie Miller Road, a quiet cul-de-sac in Salisbury, one of the residential streets between Devizes Road and Wilton Road to the west of the city centre. He was a man with an unusual past. We will hear that Sergei Skripal had been born in Russia and that he had served first as a paratrooper in the Russian army and latterly as a member of the GRU, Russian Military Intelligence. In 2004, he was convicted in Russia on espionage charges. Reportedly, the allegations against him were that he had spied for Britain. He was subsequently sentenced to a 13-year term of imprisonment, but in 2010, he was given a presidential pardon and was brought to the UK in a prisoner exchange. We will hear that Sergei Skripal had lived in Salisbury since 2010, for most of that time in the house on Christie Miller Road. After his arrival in the UK, his family, his wife, his son and daughter, had left Russia to live with him. But his wife and son had subsequently died, and his daughter had returned to Russia. His daughter, 2018, the day before the poisoning. We will hear about the events of that Saturday. A larger vehicle took him to Heathrow to collect Yulia. We will hear about Sergei and Yulia returning to the house in Christie Miller Road from Heathrow, what they did that evening, and also, of course, about the events of Skripal left the house to drive into the middle of Salisbury in the early afternoon at about 1:30 on Sunday, the 4th of March. We will hear detailed evidence as to exactly what they did as they left the house, door handle on the way out of the house, that they were poisoned with Novichok. We will be able to see from CCTV, if we could have please INQ 005819, Devizes Road towards the city centre at about 13:35. They then parked on the roof of the Sainsbury's car park next to the Maltings shopping centre. They walked through the Maltings, and if we can have, please, INQ 005819, page 69, thank you. We see them stopping to feed the ducks in the river on their walk away from the car park. They're in that box with an arrow pointing at them. They then went to the Bishop's Mill pub, arriving at 1:45, and we see here, this is INQ 5819, page 69, photo 6. This photo shows the two of them arriving at the Bishop's Mill pub. They stayed at the pub for half an hour, leaving at 2:15. By now, it was about 45 minutes since they had touched the front door handle as they left the house. Sergei Skripal appears to have put his hand to his head as he left the pub. We can see that in this picture, which is INQ 00581970. Before he was joined by his daughter, Yulia, outside the pub. The same reference number. This is photograph 8. Thank you.
So that's leaving the pub?
That's right, sir. Yes, leaving the Bishop's Mill pub at about 2:15 in the afternoon. They then walked the short distance to the Zizi's restaurant in Castle Street, where they stayed for a little over an hour, leaving at 3:35. It was now 2 hours since they had touched the front door handle. They walked back through the Maltings, as we can see in this photograph, INQ 005819. We see here an enlarged version of that photograph, the two of them walking through the Maltings, arm in arm.
So can I understand it, Mr. O'Connor? These are, as it were, fortuitously, are they, photographs that happen to have been registered on one or other CCTV system in the city centre?
Exactly, so they were recovered after the event from the CCTV system.
Right.
2 minutes after the time of the photograph that we are looking at, Sergei and Yulia Skripal sat down on a bench in the Maltings, close in fact to where they had fed the ducks earlier whilst walking from the car park. And if we can have INQ 00581973, photo or camera 13, thank you. One can see in the distance in that photograph in the yellow box, that is Sergei and Yulia Skripal sitting on the bench shortly after 3:35 in the afternoon. They were still there half an hour or so later when passing members of the public, from whom we shall hear evidence, realised that they were in distress. An ambulance was called and the Skripals were given first aid. In addition to evidence from CCTV, such as, thank you, you can take that down now, such as we've just been looking at, also the statements of passers-by and the evidence of those who provided emergency care, we will also be able to adduce first-hand evidence about these matters from Sergei and Yulia Skripal themselves. We have lengthy transcripts of police interviews that they gave after they had recovered from the initial effects of the poisoning. Also, witness statements which they produced at the time, and further witness statements that both of them have produced much more recently at your request. I should make it clear, though, that neither Sergei nor Yulia Skripal will be giving live oral evidence to the inquiry. That is the consequence of a ruling that you gave about 3 weeks ago, which has attracted some publicity and also commentary. Amongst that commentary, sir, was a tweet from the Russian embassy which asserted that your ruling, and I quote, demonstrates the British authorities' obstinacy in concealing our citizens. The full reasons for the decision that you took are set out in your ruling, which is dated the 23rd of September of this year and which is to be found published on the inquiry website. In light of the embassy tweet, may I simply make 2 further points. First, you are not the British authorities. Rather, you are the chair of a public inquiry that is entirely independent of the British government. Second, the core reason for your decision not to call the Skripals to give oral evidence, as explained, as I've mentioned, in your ruling, was in fact the risk of physical attack by whomever it might be on one or both of them, a risk which you concluded clearly outweighed the advantage to the inquiry of them attending to give oral evidence. Returning to the different strands of evidence, we shall also hear details of the testing for Novichok contamination that was undertaken at Sergei Skripal's house at 47 Christie Miller Road. If we could have, please, INQ 005819. That is a picture of the house. And also, of course, at many other locations. You will hear live evidence from the police investigators and scientists responsible for this work as to their analysis and the conclusions that can properly be drawn. I've already mentioned, for example, their key conclusion that it was the outside front door handle at 47 Christie Miller Road. We see that in an enlargement of that photograph.
So it's a lever-type handle on the front door?
It is, sir, yes. Yeah. And you will see that many of the witnesses, including, of course, Sergei and Yulia, were asked to describe exactly how it worked, what they had touched on that day, and so on. So, as I've said, the key conclusion they drew was that it was this door handle that was the source, or in their term, the ground zero of the Novichok contamination. So there's one further matter to address before leaving the narrative evidence relating to Sergei Skripal. I mentioned a few minutes ago the fact that Sergei Skripal was convicted in Russia on espionage charges, reportedly for spying for the UK. Unsurprisingly, given that conviction and subsequent events, there has been much public speculation on the related questions as to whether Sergei Skripal was in fact a British agent prior to his arrest and conviction, and also whether he worked for British intelligence agencies following his release and moved to the UK. Those two factual questions are of obvious importance to your investigation, not least because they may go towards indicating either the presence or equally an absence of a possible motive on the part of the Russian state for attempting to kill Sergei Skripal. The government, HMG, is of course able to provide evidence as to whether either or both of those factual allegations, i.e. whether Sergei Skripal worked with UK intelligence agencies before and or after he arrived in the UK, whether either or both of those allegations is true. But in a ruling that you gave on the 3rd of November 2023, you ruled that HMG will not be required to provide this evidence in open. As with other rulings that I've mentioned, that particular ruling is available on the inquiry website. And your reasoning on this issue is to be found at paragraph 15 of that ruling. In essence, you accepted that to depart from the so-called NCND, or neither confirm nor deny principle, by requiring HMG to confirm or deny that Sergei Skripal was a British agent, would cause unjustifiable damage to national security. As the legal cases explain, the reason for that general principle is not only to protect individuals whose activity is questioned, but also, and more importantly, to ensure that anyone who may give information to the British authorities, now or in the future, can be confident that whatever their relationship with them may be, the authorities will never be required to discuss it publicly. There is no doubt, sir, that the question of whether Sergei Skripal did or did not have a relationship with UK intelligence agencies, and more detailed questions that may follow, are of great importance to your investigation. To borrow Lord Bingham's words, those matters will be examined both fully and fearlessly. But the consequence of your ruling, to which I have referred, is that we will explore those matters not in the open hearings that begin today, but rather in the closed evidence sessions that the inquiry will hold subsequently. I turn now to the broader factual circumstances surrounding Dawn Sturgess's death. Later this week, we will call evidence relating to Dawn's movements and activities, both on the day before she was poisoned and on the day itself. On the day before she was poisoned, that is Friday, the 29th of June 2018, we will hear that Dawn spent the day with her partner, Charlie Rowley, and other friends in Salisbury for much of the day, enjoying the summer sunshine. During the day, Dawn Sturgess, Charlie Rowley and friends came and went from Dawn's room in John Baker House in Salisbury. They shopped and they spent some of the afternoon in Queen Elizabeth Gardens. They then returned to Dawn's room, as I said, in John Baker House. Later that evening, about 9:30 p.m, Dawn and Charlie left John Baker House and caught a bus to Amesbury. They went to Charlie's flat on Muggleton Road in Amesbury and spent the night there.
So Dawn lives at this time in Salisbury and Charlie in Amesbury.
That's correct, sir.
Thank you.
And there are plentiful sources of evidence of Dawn's movement on that Friday, from Charlie and the others that she was with, from other witnesses who remembered seeing or talking to her and gave statements to the police, and also from CCTV. That evidence, as I've said, will be considered in more detail later this week. For present purposes, I just ask that one set of photos, that's INQ 00581998, thank you, is brought up. This page, sir, shows a series of screenshots from CCTV footage taken in Salisbury on that Friday, between 2:24 in the afternoon and 9:53 in the evening, showing Dawn out and about on what was obviously a sunny summer's day. Thank you. There is much less evidence, by contrast, about the crucial events of the next morning. The only direct evidence we have about what took place in the flat on Muggleton Road during the morning of Saturday, the 30th of June, are the accounts given by Charlie Rowley. His evidence will explain how, between about 9:30 and 10 o'clock that morning, he gave Dawn what he thought was a bottle of perfume that he had found, how he helped her by opening the packaging and attaching the nozzle, in the process spilling some of the contents on his own hands, and how Dawn then took the bottle and applied what she also thought was perfume. After all, why should she think anything else? To her wrists. Charlie Rowley's evidence will also cover Dawn's subsequent collapse, how he called the emergency services, and how later in the day he himself developed symptoms, collapsed, and was taken to hospital. Further, we will hear detailed evidence regarding, first of all, the bottle itself. If we could have, please, INQ 005126, page 6, thank you. Secondly, the cardboard packaging that it was found in, INQ 0051261. Thank you. And also the plastic packaging in which the bottle and the applicator appear to have been sealed inside the box. If we could have, please, INQ 004675. Thank you. So this photo shows one of the two bits of plastic packaging that were found and which, as I've said, were believed to have held the components of the perfume bottle inside the cardboard box.
What is it, Mr. O'Connor? Shaped or moulded plastic?
So we'll hear more evidence about that, but this is not shaped or moulded plastic. These are
Just bags?
Appear to be plastic bags. And so we'll also hear about the scene at Muggleton Road and where the various items that I've mentioned were discovered when the flat was subsequently searched. And to give one example, if we could have, please, INQ 00512610. Yes, so there is a photo of one corner of the kitchen in Muggleton Road. We're mainly looking at the bin, but we can see just on the floor next to the bin, that cardboard box. That's where it was found, discarded, in fact, with the bus ticket from the journey from someone at the floor,
Yep.
and the cardboard box was found, discarded. One may imagine that someone tried to get it in the bin and didn't quite make it. Thank you, we can take that down. So I'm going to move on to the third of those issues I mentioned earlier, and that is the question of medical treatment. Medics, and then taken to Salisbury District Hospital. We will hear evidence from those who provided pre-hospital care and from those who treated them once they arrived in hospital. On one level, this evidence will form part of the narrative. It's an important building block to establishing how and why Dawn died. That is not, however, where the medical issues end. There are further questions that have been included within the scope of the investigation at the particular request of the Sturgess family. Understandably, they seek answers as to why Dawn died when others, who were also poisoned with Novichok, Sergei and Yulia Skripal, Charlie Rowley, also the police officer Nick Bailey, did not. They've asked whether this could have been the result of the somewhat different treatment that Dawn received, different in particular to the emergency treatment given to Charlie Rowley only a few hours after Dawn had been taken to hospital. They wish to understand why doctors, apparently acting on information from the police, initially theorised that Dawn's symptoms may have been caused by a drug overdose, and whether this theory was dismissed as quickly as it should have been. They ask whether Dawn's medical treatment was properly informed by lessons that had been learnt, or at least that should have been learnt, months earlier in treating the Skripals. And ultimately, of course, they wish to know whether anything that may have gone wrong in Dawn's treatment could have made a difference to her chances of survival. To use a legal term, if there were failings, were they causative? In addition to the evidence of those who cared for the patients and of, for example, the pathologist who conducted Dawn's post-mortem, you will be assisted in considering these issues by expert witnesses who have prepared independent reviews of what happened at the request of the inquiry, and who will give oral evidence in respect of pre-hospital care. The expert in question is Mr. Mark Faulkner, and in the context of hospital care, you will hear evidence from Dr. Jasmine Saw, Professor Jerry Nolan, and Dr. David Minks. So I now come to the issue of responsibility for the Skripal poisonings. The key questions that arise can be shortly stated, but they are of the utmost gravity. Who was it who poisoned Sergei and Yulia Skripal? when, as everyone will be aware, since the time of the poisonings in 2018, the British government took the unusual step of publicly attributing responsibility to the Russian government. On Monday, the 12th of March 2018, a week and a day after the poisoning, the then Prime Minister Theresa May made a memorable statement to the House of Commons, and if we could have it please, it's INQ 005992.
It is now B-grade nerve agent of a type developed by Russia. This is part of a group of nerve agents known as Novichok. Based on the positive identification of this chemical agent by world-leading experts at the Defence Science and Technology Laboratory at Porton Down, our knowledge that Russia has previously produced this agent and would still be capable of doing so, Russia's record of conducting state-sponsored assassinations, and our assessment that Russia views some defectors as legitimate targets for assassinations, the government has concluded that it is highly likely that Russia was responsible for the act against Sergei and Yulia Skripal.
Thank you. A month later, on the 13th of April 2018, there was a further important development when Sir Mark Sedwill, the then UK National Security Advisor, wrote a public letter to the NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg, in which he set out what amounted to the British government's case in support of its assertion that Russia had been responsible for the poisoning. The letter is at INQ 003070. If we can go, as we have done, to the third page, we can see that Sir Mark's summary was that only Russia has the technical means, operational experience and motive for the attack on the Skripals, and that it is highly likely that the Russian state was responsible. There is, he said, no plausible alternative explanation. Thank you. We shall, sir, consider the assessments in Sir Mark's letter in detail during the rest of the hearings. And 5 months later, as I've already mentioned, in September 2018, the Crown Prosecution Service announced charges, including the attempted murder of Sergei and Yulia Skripal against 2 Russian men. I will return to them in a moment. So I've already emphasised this morning, and indeed you have said words to a similar effect, that this inquiry, and in particular you as its chair, are entirely independent of the British government. You will make your findings on the issues that are contained in the terms of reference on the basis of the evidence you have heard and nothing else. I've referred to these government statements because they were very publicly made and have become well known. I stress that they are not themselves evidence. They are statements of the government's conclusions. Whether the government was right or not is what this inquiry must determine, where the evidence provides an answer. It may have been right, or it may not have been. Far from being bound to accept its conclusions, you are undertaking an independent examination of the evidence. The Russian government has, of course, also responded publicly to the Skripal poisoning. You have made it clear that you wish to take full account of what they have said about it and to explore in evidence queries that they have raised. By way of introduction, I mention 2 documents. The first, if we can have please, INQ 004813, which contains transcripts of press conferences given by the Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, on Tuesday the 13th of March 2018, which was the day after Theresa May made the statement we have just seen, and also on the next day, Wednesday the 14th of March. We will consider the full details of those transcripts in due course, but for present purposes, the essence of Mr. Lavrov's position is apparent from the final 2 answers that he gave to questions from a BBC journalist at the second of those two press conferences, and that is the page that we have on screen now, and I will read out a section of the transcript which is on the screen. The question, which, as I have said, appears to have been from a BBC journalist, was, can you rule out Russia's involvement in the Sergei Skripal case? Mr. Lavrov's response, you're a strange one. I said that we are members of the Convention on the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, as is your country, which for some reason neglects to use the expertise of those who know what obligations the United Kingdom has. If the procedures envisaged in the Convention are fulfilled, I assure you that the Russian Federation will fulfill its obligations and respond to the corresponding request in the time allocated to prepare a response. In turn, we are waiting for the United Kingdom to respond to our request, sent in accordance with the same convention, to provide the substance in question and to make the whole investigation open to us because it involves a Russian national. If I have not explained this clearly enough, we will certainly make a transcript of my answers to the first and additional questions. We'll send it to the BBC in the hope that this time around you will not censor it before publishing or broadcasting it to your listeners and viewers. And then the next question, still, can you rule out Russia's involvement in the Skripal case? Mr. Lavrov, we've already made a statement, which is that it is all nonsense. Maria Zakharova, who, sir, was the director of the Information and Press Department of the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, she has laid it out more politely. We have nothing to do with it. Everyone seems to be so brainwashed that our blogosphere is already full of comments that turn things upside down. I read with amazement on one blog that I said it was unacceptable to compare the Alexander Litvinenko case and the Skripal case. I said exactly the opposite. They asked this question during my last trip to one of the African countries. I said there was a similarity with the former case. When we began to cooperate with the investigators, it was classified, and we were told that we could not have all the information. Pretty much the same is happening this time around. We are given nothing in return for our request. So please, again, I beg you, please report all I am saying now in detail, rather than limit your report to what I am imagining. Asked whether Russia is guilty, Mr. Lavrov fudged the issue. Russia is not guilty. Russia is ready to cooperate in accordance with the Convention on the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons if the United Kingdom condescends to fulfill its international obligations under the same document. Thank you. Moving on, sir, in March 2019, a year after the poisonings, the Russian embassy in London published a document entitled Salisbury Unanswered Questions. That is INQ 000612539. Should we come back to that one? Let's come back to that one. That document, though, which, as I've said, was published in March 2019, has subsequently been updated and republished several times since. And the most recent version, and the one that will be of more importance to us, was dated March 2023 and was entitled Salisbury 5 Years of Unanswered Questions. That is INQ 004576.
Is that the one you want us to look at?
Well, we will look at it in due course. I wonder whether we at least can call it up to see, so that we remember it when we come back to it. or perhaps not.
No, I think it may be coming.
Let's move on.
I think it may be coming, Mr. O'Connor.
All right.
Looking over the shoulder of the
I shall wait in
person who knows.
Yes, well, thank you. So those are in fact both of the documents. On the left-hand side, the initial document from March 2019, and on the right-hand side, the, as it were, updated version from 2023. And I will, in the course of the inquiry's evidence hearings, we shall explore as many as possible of those unanswered questions that have been raised.
Yes, these are just the covers, are they?
They're just the covers, and I'll return to...
I shall want in due course, you must take your own time, Mr. O'Connor. I'm not trying to tell you when to do it, but we shall need to look at what they say and see whether it is right or not.
Well, we shall, sir. Of course, we'll focus on the one on the right-hand side, and in a moment,
yes,
a few moments, I will come to take you to some passages of that document, the 2023 document. Thank you very much. So the questions around possible Russian state responsibility for the Skripal poisonings, and also its possible indirect responsibility for Dawn Sturgess's death, are plainly matters of the utmost public concern. It is one of the core functions of this inquiry to reach authoritative and conclusive answers to those questions. As I've already said, you will make those findings independently and solely on the basis of the evidence that has been adduced before you. Whilst there will of course be closed evidence going to these questions, there will also be a significant amount of open evidence that you will hear in coming weeks. At the heart of your consideration of these issues will be detailed factual evidence that you will hear about 3 Russian men. If we can have, please, INQ 0058196. They are the 3 men shown in this photograph. And as you can see, their names are given as Alexander Petrov, Ruslan Boshirov, and Sergei Fedotov. Let me say straight away that you will hear evidence to the effect that those names are aliases, and that the men's real names are in fact, respectively, Alexander Mishkin, Anatoly Chepiga, and Denis Sergeyev. As a default for these hearings, we propose to refer to these men using the names by which they entered this country in 2018.
And that's these, is it?
Indeed. Petrov, Boshirov, and Fedotov. We will present evidence gathered by the police suggesting that these 3 men are in fact officers of Russian military intelligence, the GRU, or at least they were in 2018. That all 3 of them are associated with GRU Unit 29155, and that they had travelled extensively in Europe, often together, prior to 2018. We will explore that evidence in the coming weeks. I don't propose to say any more about it today. I do wish, though, to spend a few minutes introducing the evidence that you will hear about the visit that all 3 of these men made to the UK over 3 days in March 2018. There will be evidence that all 3 men arrived in London on flights from Sheremetyevo Airport in Moscow on Friday, the 2nd of March. Fedotov arriving in the morning on a flight landing at Heathrow, and Petrov and Boshirov arriving together on a flight that landed at Gatwick during the afternoon. There will be evidence of their travel into London and on to their hotels. Petrov and Boshirov stayed at the City Stay Hotel in Bow, and Fedotov at the Dolphin Hotel in Paddington.
Sorry, Bow and Paddington?
Yes.
So some distance apart in London?
Yes, indeed.
Right.
There will be evidence from mobile phone cell sighting of their movements around London over the next 2 days, the Saturday and the Sunday, including the possibility that the 3 men met together. and we will see evidence of their departure back to Moscow from London on Sunday, the 4th of March. Fedotov on a flight from Heathrow that departed in the early afternoon, and Petrov and Bosharov on a flight also this time from Heathrow at 10:30 that night. During this period, Petrov and Bosharov made 2 visits to Salisbury, the first on Saturday the 3rd of March and the second the day after, on Sunday the 4th of March. On both occasions, they made the return trip to Salisbury by train from Waterloo Station. So the evidence about what the 2 men did on those visits to Salisbury will be of critical importance to the issue of responsibility for the Skripal poisonings, and indeed to the work of this inquiry generally. In particular, of course, you will consider whether the 2 men took Novichok with them to Salisbury on their second visit and used it to poison Sergei and Yulia Skripal. There will be plentiful evidence of their movements and actions, and we will review it in detail during the coming hearings. The evidence is complex, and of course, the detail matters. For today's purposes, I propose simply to outline the effect of the CCTV evidence regarding Petrov and Bosharov's movements in the course of their 2 visits to Salisbury. So I hope a useful starting point is the map that's on the screen, which is INQ 00581934.
Now, everybody who comes from Salisbury will know this inside out, but some of us may not.
So this is aimed at the second category.
Please.
So I hope that one can see identified with the grey box Salisbury train station, which was Petrov and Bosharov's point of arrival and departure on both days. I hope that that can be seen just below the centre of the map. Salisbury city centre, the cathedral, the close, the shops, indeed the Guildhall where we are now, are to the east of the station, largely in fact off this map, but accessed via Fisherton Street and Bridge Street, which can be seen running east from the station.
So heading right across the map as we look at it.
That's right, sir, yes.
Right.
But slightly to the north of the station is St Paul's roundabout, and running west from that roundabout are 2 roads, Wilton Road and Devizes Road. In the wedge between those 2 roads are a number of residential streets, and one of those streets, which is shown with the red marker on the map, and it is about half a mile from the roundabout, is Christie Miller Road, where Sergei Skripal's house was located. Petrov and Bosharov made their first trip to Salisbury on Saturday the 3rd of March. You will recall that this was the day that Sergei Skripal was given a lift by his neighbour to Heathrow in order to collect Yulia, who was arriving on a flight from Moscow. The evidence will be that Sergei Skripal left his house to go to Heathrow at about 2:20 that afternoon. That was, in fact, almost exactly the time that almost exactly the same time as Petrov and Bosharov's train arrived at Salisbury Station. The 2 men left the station on foot and walked to Fisherton Street. Then, rather than turning right towards the city centre...
Well, am I right? You pretty well have to go down to Fisherton Street if you start at the station.
It's certainly a main route of egress from the station. I think there is at least one other street.
Right.
So that's the main route of leaving the station, so yes. The more important point, as I've said, as I was coming to, is that when they reached Fisherton Street, rather than turning right towards the city centre, they turned left towards St Paul's roundabout. And we have a more detailed map, which is INQ 00581965, entitled Journey 1. This map, sir, reflects the evidence that you will hear about what they did next. As you can see from the markings, they walked to the roundabout and walked a little way up Wilton Road. They then retraced their steps to the roundabout and walked up Devizes Road as far as India Avenue. where they walked south through residential streets in the area of Christie Miller Road.
Sorry, India Avenue, is that where the blue arrow is going at the top of the map?
It's where the blue arrow becomes a yellow marking, and I'll mention the difference between those two in a moment.
Got it.
So they walked south. Through residential streets in the area of Christie Miller Road before re-emerging onto Wilton Road and walking back to the roundabout and then the station.
Right.
The blue sections of the route, sir, are those that will be evidenced directly or indirectly by CCTV footage. The yellow sections are those that are not covered by CCTV cameras and are therefore inferred. And you will hear much more about this, of course, when we get to the detail of the evidence.
So the yellow is deduction rather than camera.
Correct, sir. And as I say, the basis of that deduction I'm not going to get into today.
No,
we will hear
come to that.
In due course. So having returned to the station, and you can see them returning there at the bottom of that map, Petrov and Bosherov set off again, almost immediately back towards Fisherton Street. And if we could have, please, the map for Journey 2 on the screen. Thank you. As this map shows, the evidence will be that they again turned left onto Fisherton Street. They walked to the roundabout. This time they walked all the way up Wilton Road. The yellow marking then shows an assessed route up Highbury Avenue to Christie Miller Road and then back to Wilton Road, either by way of Montgomery Gardens or Canadian Avenue. Having returned to Wilton Road, they walked back to the station. So if we could have, please, INQ 005819, page 38. So this is a photo of Petrov and Bosherov walking south along India Avenue. You can see the snow that I referred to earlier. This is during the first of their round trips that day.
Mm-hmm. You can see having turned left off, is it Devizes Road? Devizes Road, yeah.
You can see from an enlargement of that photo that they both appear to be looking at their mobile phones. That is something that we will hear more about when we consider this evidence in detail.
Right.
So if we could now have INQ 00581941, please. Bottom right-hand corner. Yes. So this is a photograph of the two men walking west along Wilton Road on the outbound section of their second trip. And if we can see the enlargement of that photograph, yes, that is an enlargement of that photograph. It looks like one of the men may be actually looking at the CCTV camera at the time. Thank you, we can take that down. So Petrov and Bosherov arrived back at the station for the second time at a little after 4:30 in the afternoon. On this occasion, they got on a train and travelled back to Waterloo, having spent over 2 hours in Salisbury. Sergei and Yulia Skripal did not arrive back at Christie Miller Road until several hours after that, at about 7:30 that evening. So you will, of course, hear the fine detail of the evidence that I have just summarised, and you will then have to try and reach conclusions as to what the men were doing in Salisbury that day. Was it an entirely innocent day trip, or was it something more sinister? Why did the two men, purposefully apparently, avoid the centre of Salisbury? Might it have been a deliberate reconnaissance of Sergei Skripal's house and access routes between the house and the station? Was it a coincidence that Petrov and Bosherov's visit to Salisbury coincided with a time when Sergei Skripal was away from his house? As I've said, the two men returned to Salisbury the next day, Sunday the 4th of March. This was the day when Sergei and Yulia Skripal drove into Salisbury in the early afternoon and later collapsed on a bench in the Maltings shopping centre. The evidence will be that on that Sunday, Petrov and Bosherov's train arrived at Salisbury station at about 11:45 in the morning. They left the station on foot and walked to Fisherton Street. And if we have on screen, thank you, INQ 581965, this is Journey 3. And as they had done twice on the previous day, the two men turned left onto Fisherton Street and walked to St Paul's roundabout. This time, they walked along Wilton Road before disappearing from the view of CCTV cameras near the junction with Montgomery Gardens. They were next seen again on Devizes Road, back near the roundabout. As before, the yellow line shows the route that the men are assessed to have taken. And as we've said, the basis of that assessment will be explained when you hear the detailed evidence.
Right.
As you will note, the assessed route passes Christie Miller Road and Sergei Skripal's house. Petrov and Bosharov arrived back in the area of the railway station shortly before 12:30 p.m. This time, instead of turning off Fisherton Street towards the station, they continued to walk east on Fisherton Street, taking them for the first time in the direction of the city centre. A few hundred yards beyond the turning to the station, Petrov and Bosharov turned off Fisherton Street into a small road named Water Lane. They were then lost from the view of
What's that? Is that the blue arrow, Mr.
It's the blue arrow with the yellow...
With yellow underneath it?
Yes.
Yes, I see. And that's, what did you say, Water Street?
Water Lane, sir.
Water Lane, right.
And they were then lost from the view of CCTV cameras for 31 minutes before they re-emerged at the junction of the High Street and Bridge Street. That's the blue marking to the right that you can see there, and walked back towards the station.
Yep.
But you will hear evidence as to where they might have been and what they might have done during that 31-minute period. Having walked west back along Fisherton Street, Petrov and Bosharov walked past the turning to the station and on to St Paul's roundabout. And if we could have, again, INQ 581965, Journey 4. Thank you. This map shows the last of the journeys that they made out towards Christie Miller Road. As can be seen, their route was similar but not identical to their previous one. They again walked west along Wilton Road, but this time they appear to have walked up Highbury Avenue, and it is assessed, walked to Christie Miller Road before walking east, back towards the roundabout, along Devizes Road. If we could see, please, INQ 00581963, photo 5, thank you. So this still from CCTV footage shows the two men walking back down Devizes Road towards the station at 13:40. And you may recall that earlier this morning I showed a different photograph taken by the same CCTV camera, which showed Sergei Skripal's BMW driving along Devizes Road at very much the same time towards the Sainsbury's car park. And there it is. This is 581967.
Yep.
You will see that the photo is timed at 13:35.
13:30.
13:35. In other words, a few minutes...
The number in the top right-hand corner is slightly out, is it?
Yes, sorry, Sue. We need to look at the number at the bottom.
Right.
These are all corrected times.
Yes.
You will hear much more evidence about discrepancy on CCTV
Well, I know,
timings.
but we need to get it in our heads now, if possible.
Yes.
Yes.
So the point is, this photograph then is shortly before, 5 minutes or so, before the same camera picked up the two men passing the same spot. Given the timings, it seems quite possible that Sergei and Yulia Skripal drove past Petrov and Bosharov further up, back up Devizes Road.
Can you just go back to the 13:40 one?
Yep, that's 581963.
Remembering what we're looking at now, you're telling us, I think, that we're going to be, this is the same camera, isn't it?
It is. You can see what's noticeable if you see the junction.
No, wait a minute. We need 30.
Yeah. Can you see they're walking across that junction?
It's the junction on the right, which is the telltale.
Yeah.
Got it.
So, of course, we will look at this in more detail, but what this shows is that both Petrov and Bosharov and the Skripals in very much the same area at very much the same time. One has to aim off, of course, because two of them on foot,
Yes.
and then there's the car. But it does seem at least possible that Bosherov and Petrov may even have been in the vicinity of Sergei Skripal's house at the time that the Skripals were leaving.
Yes.
So as with their actions on the Saturday, there will be much for you to consider about Petrov and Bosherov's actions on the Sunday. Did they place Novichok on Sergei Skripal's front door handle during the first of their trips to Christie Miller Road on that Sunday morning? Where did they go and what did they do during the missing 31 minutes in the area of the city centre? Was the perfume bottle that Charlie Rowley gave to Dawn Sturgess months later, with such terrible consequences, brought to Salisbury on that Sunday morning by these two men? If so, did they discard it in the city centre during the missing 31 minutes, or at a different time and in a different place? If they did place Novichok on the front door handle during their first visit to Christie Miller Road that morning, why did they go back a second time? And was it chance that their second visit coincided almost exactly with the time when Sergei and Yulia Skripal were leaving the house? So we do not anticipate that you will have the benefit of hearing oral evidence directly from either Petrov or Bosherov, or indeed from Fedotov, nor have the three men provided with the inquiry with any written evidence. Attempts were made to contact Petrov and Bosherov at earlier stages of these proceedings. They were each written to 3 times care of the Russian embassy in London between 2019 and 2021, but no responses were ever received. The existence of this inquiry has, of course, been well publicised in recent years. There are contact details on the inquiry website. Any of these 3 men could have made contact with the inquiry at any time, but they've chosen not to do so. We do have, though, the recording of an interview that Petrov and Bosherov gave to RT, the Russian TV news channel, in September 2018. The timing of the interview is significant. It was broadcast on the 13th of September 2018, 8 days after it was announced in the UK that the CPS would be bringing charges against the 2 men, an announcement that had been accompanied by the publication of some of the same CCTV photos showing Petrov and Bosherov in Salisbury that we've seen this morning, together with pictures of the Nina Ricci bottle found in Amesbury. So the total running time of the interview is about 30 minutes. We will, of course, play the entire interview during these hearings. For today's purposes, I will ask that just the first 8.5 minutes of the interview is played.
Вы позвонили мне на мобильный телефон и сказали, что вы Руслан Баширов и Александр Петров. Александр Петров и Руслан Баширов. Вы реально похожи на то, что нам показывали из Британии, на те фотографии и на те видео. Вы на самом деле кто?
Мы на самом деле те, кого и показывали.
Руслан Баширов.
Александр Петров.
Это ваши настоящие имена?
Да.
Да, это наши настоящие имена.
Но вы даже сейчас, когда об этом говорите, вы вот честно выглядите очень напряженными.
А как бы вы выглядели
Когда
после
вашу
всего?
жизнь такой вот раз и перевернули с ног на голову, просто одним днем и сломали.
На этих записях, которые мы видим из Лондона, где вы ходите в этих уже знаменитых пуховиках, кроссовочках, по Солсбери, это вы.
Да.
Да, это мы.
Что вы там делали?
Ну, друзья нам давно уже советовали посетить этот прекрасный город.
Солсбери.
Да,
Прекрасный город.
да.
Он это
чем он
туристический
прекрасен?
город. Там есть знаменитый собор, Солсберийский собор. Он знаменит не только во всей Европе, он знаменит, я так думаю, даже во всем мире. Он знаменит своим шпилем 123-метровым, он знаменит своими часами, самыми первыми часами, которые были изобретены в мире, которые до сих пор идут.
То есть вы поехали в Солсбери посмотреть на часы?
Да нет, но с самого начала мы планировали приехать в Лондон и оторваться, грубо говоря. Это была не бизнес-поездка сейчас. И мы распланировали так, что мы и в Лондоне побываем, и съездим в Солсбери. Естественно, это все должно было быть одним днем. Но когда мы туда прилетели, у нас даже самолет, мы думали, что не с первого раза посадят, потому что в Англии 2 и 3 числа был просто транспортный коллапс. Да, что там транспорт? Там было, как это сказать, снегопад. Настолько мощный, что завалило практически все города. И мы никуда не смогли добраться.
По всем телевизорам показывали то, что 2-3 числа железные дороги, они вообще не работали. Автомобильные дороги то же самое. Они были перекрыты полицейскими, перекрыты скорой помощью, и было вообще перекрыто движение. Не было вообще движения никакого. Все поезда, ничто, вообще ничего не ходило. Почему это ничего не показывает?
Вы можете описать, ну, может, не поминутно, ну, почасово, ну, или хотя бы сколько вы помните. Вы прилетели в Великобританию, как вы говорите, оторваться и посмотреть на собор и некие часы в Солсбери. Вы можете описать, что вы делали в Англии? Вы 2 дня там были, правильно?
Ну, 3 получается, да.
3 дня. Что вы делали эти 3 дня?
Ну, 2 числа мы прилетели в Англию, приехали на вокзал посмотреть расписание, куда мы сможем съездить.
Мы вообще-то планировали одним днем съездить. Просто одним днем съездить и посмотреть.
Именно в Солсбери. 1 день. Там достаточно, там больше 1 дня делать нечего.
Это нормальный туристический, Солсбери, он город нормальный туристический.
Хорошо, это я поняла, это вы планировали. По факту, что вы делали? Вы прилетели, там снегопад, туда чего-то не ходит, поезда не ходят. Дальше что? Что вы делали?
Нет, мы приехали в Солсбери 3 числа. Пробыли там ровно, наверное, пытались погулять по городу, но так как был город весь полностью завален снегом, нас хватило ровно на полчаса.
Да,
нету
ни одной фотографии, ни одно СМИ, ни один телеканал не показывает то, что в этот день, 3 числа, в этом городе был коллапс, снежный коллапс. Там невозможно было пройти никуда. Мы вымокли все по колено.
То есть вы полчаса погуляли, вымокли и дальше?
Естественно, мы ехали, чтобы посетить Стоунхендж, Олд Сарум, собор Девы Марии. Но этого не получилось, потому что там была, ну, как-то по-русски, жижа. Город был в полной жиже. Мы промокли, вернулись на вокзал, и на ближайшей электричке мы уехали обратно. Минут 40 мы провели на вокзале в кафе.
Пили кофе, пили горячий кофе, потому что мы вымокли все. И мы максимум провели 3 числа час.
Может быть, час, да, там час лишним.
Потому что это невозможно.
Потому что электрички ходили с большим разрывом, именно, наверное, из-за транспортного коллапса. Мы вернулись в Лондон и продолжили наше путешествие.
Мы гуляли по Лондону, мы ходили
То есть
вечером.
в Солсбери вы провели всего час?
3 числа, да, потому что невозможно было никуда пройти.
А другого числа?
А 4 числа мы вернулись, потому что в Лондоне все растаяло, была теплая погода. Мы подумали,
Солнце светило.
целенаправленно хотели посетить Олд Сарум и собор. И решили завершить это дело 4 числа.
Завершить это дело, это какое дело?
Ну, посетить эти.
Посмотреть вот этот знаменитый собор. Сходить на Олд Сарум. Мы посмотрели.
4 числа, да, посмотрели, но опять-таки там в обед начался такой ливень со снегом, что мы
Почему тоже
уехали раньше времени,
Собор
чем
красивый.
планировали там находиться.
Собор очень красивый, там очень много туристов, там очень много русских туристов, там очень много русскоговорящих туристов.
Кстати, с собора должно быть очень много фотографий, которые должны были, да,
Должны были показать.
наверное,
Вы же
показать,
фоткались, наверное,
показать СМИ.
Конечно.
Фоткались.
Мы сидели в парке, мы сидели, пили кофе, мы заходили в кафе, пили кофе, мы гуляли. Мы гуляли, наслаждались вот этой вот английской готикой, вот этой красотой.
Этого не показывают. Показывают только наше нахождение на вокзале.
Покажите нам эти фотки, мы покажем.
Наши на вокзале.
За то время, что вы были в Солсбери, вы подходили к дому Скрипалей?
Ну, может быть, мы к нему и подходили.
Вы знаете, где
если бы мы знали, где
Я
он
нет,
находится.
а вы?
Я не
Если бы
знаю,
мы знали,
Дон
где он
Сturgess.
находится.
Может, и проходили мимо, может, и не проходили. Я не знаю, я вообще не слышал до вот этой ситуации, пока не начался вот этот кошмар с нами. И я не слышал эту фамилию, я не знал ничего про них.
Когда вы прилетели в Великобританию, когда вы были в Лондоне или когда вы были в Солсбери, за все время, что вы там были, у вас был с собой новичок или какой-то другой отравляющий яд, или какая-то опасная жидкость?
Нет.
Мне кажется, это вообще бред.
У вас был с собой флакон духов Нина Ричи, который демонстрирует британская сторона как evidence, как вещественное доказательство вашего, как они считают, преступления.
Нормальным мужикам с собой возить женские духи – это не глупо. Ну, даже реально проходя таможню, проходишь когда таможню, проверяют все вещи. И просто любой полицейский при досмотре, у него, ну, я думаю, если бы у нас что-то было бы, у них бы возникли бы эти вопросы бы. Зачем у мужчины в багаже лежат женские духи?
По крайней мере, даже у простых людей, наверное, возникли бы эти вопросы. Зачем мужчинам женские духи?
Где бы простые люди увидели ваши духи?
Не, проходя таможню, проходишь когда таможню?
Короче говоря, у вас были с собой духи Нина Ричи?
Нет.
Или не было?
Нет,
Нет.
конечно.
К вопросу.
So, detailed factual evidence relating to these three men is not the only open evidence that bears on questions of responsibility for the Skripal poisoning. You will also hear evidence from at least three further sources that you may find helpful in reaching your conclusions on that issue. First, Sergei Skripal himself has expressed his own views on the matter. When interviewed in May 2018, he stated that he believed President Putin was responsible for poisoning him. And if we could have the transcript of his interview, please, it's INQ 0057461. And we can perhaps just see there that the date of the interview is the 15th of May 2018, so 2 months or so after the poisoning. And then if we can go to page 9 of the transcript, I'm going to read a passage starting about a third of the way down. And the police officer says, "Sergei, we've spoken again about what happened on the Sunday, and we've spoken about what happened on the Saturday. And the other question which we asked you yesterday was about why you thought this had happened to you. And just to clarify and summarize, you said that you thought Putin was responsible, and Sergei Skripal says, it's my private opinion. And the police officer says, yeah, it's your private opinion, and I know that's not anything evidentially based, it's your opinion. And you explained that you thought he was responsible for it. You thought it may be because they believe you were still actively working for the West. And Sergei Skripal says, this is number one reason. The police officer says, and you think it would be the equivalent of, I always get, is it FSB? And Sergei Skripal says, FSB. Police officer, FSB rather than the GRU, because you held a very high position and had a lot of respect within the GRU. And you also have lots of people that are still your friends or associates within that. So you don't think they would have worked to have done this to you. And Mr. Skripal said, yes, absolutely sure. Thank you. That's all I wanted to read from that transcript. But as you know, much more recently, in fact, in the last week or so, Mr. Skripal has provided the inquiry with a further witness statement. That is, if we could have it up, please, INQ 006086. Thank you. That's actually, if we could just go back to the first page of the document. It's possible. That's the first page of the statement, sir. And one of the issues he addresses in that statement, now if we could go forward to page 5, please. That's it. No. Yes, so page 5, and you'll see that one of the questions he addresses is entitled Questions about who is responsible for the attack. And I'm going to read a relatively lengthy section from the statement so that we all understand what Mr. Skripal's current view is. He says this: I was arrested in Russia in 2004 and was put in prison. I stayed there until Medvedev, at that time the president of Russia, signed my pardon in 2010. I was then released and helped to come to Great Britain in an exchange of prisoners. I do not know for certain how Putin personally viewed me then or later. As far as I know, I never spoke to him, although I was in the same room as him 2 times many years ago. Based on my experience in GRU Special Service, it is normal in the intelligence business to exchange people. In 2010, the US had arrested many Russian spies, so Putin needed people to trade. It is not honourable to kill people who have been exchanged, and the attack on Yulia and me was an absolute shock. I had received a presidential pardon and was a free man with no convictions under Russian law. I never thought the Russian regime would try to murder me in Great Britain. They could have killed me easily if they wanted to when I was in prison. After I left Russia, I lived quite a normal life for almost 8 years. I continued relationships with Russian friends and family after I left Russia. Some came to visit me in Great Britain, and as far as I'm aware, they did not face problems. My daughter and son went to Russia on holidays, and my daughter even lived there, as far as I'm aware, without any difficulties, and they travelled back to Salisbury. This was routine. I understand that Ross, that is Ross Cassidy, who's a witness from whom you'll be hearing, sir, remembers me telling him Putin would get me if I went back to Russia. I knew of no specific threat, but of course I thought returning to Russia would be dangerous. People who do not support the regime are in danger there. My mother warned me as soon as I arrived in Great Britain never to think about returning to Russia. I never did, although legally I could have done so. If I had gone back to Russia and something had happened to me, I would not have been surprised. A pardon is only a piece of paper when in Russia, but so far as I'm aware, an exchange of prisoners is normally respected between states. I've been asked about some of my theories for why the Russian government wanted me dead. In the transcript of my interview of the 14th of May 2018, I said, Putin knows me, I know him, personally. I understand Ross remembers me saying this to him too. I don't remember saying I had met Putin himself. If I did so, it's an exaggeration. I meant that I know Putin's character. I believe Putin makes all important decisions himself. I therefore think he must at least have given permission for the attack on Yulia and me. Any GRU commander taking a decision like this without Putin's permission would have been severely punished. That is what I meant when I said special services in Russia will do nothing again without permission Putin. That he ordered the attack is my private opinion, based on my years of experience and my analysis of the continuous degradation of Russia. I do not have concrete evidence to support this. When I was still working in GRU special services in Russia, I had access to secret information. I was aware of allegations that Putin had been involved in illegal activity to do with the disposal of rare metals. I've always thought poison is a KGB technique because it is not honourable. GRU relations with the KGB and later the FSB were generally bad while I was working in the GRU, and we did not cooperate, so I have not myself seen evidence of the KGB using poison. I have read that Putin is personally very interested in poison and likes reading books about it. I believe I read this somewhere online, although I cannot now remember where. I'm aware of the poisoning of Litvinenko in 2006. I think Yulia was right in principle when she said, if the Russian government want to kill you, they will find a way anywhere. Nobody can be protected 100% from an assassin, especially one who plans carefully or is prepared to die. Thank you. So I mentioned 3 further sources of open evidence on the issue of responsibility for the poisonings. Sergei Skripal's evidence was the first. The second is assessments made by the government of this country. Jonathan Allen, a senior FCDO official, has provided the inquiry with a statement containing HMG's current assessments regarding responsibility for the poisoning. If we could have it up, please, it's INQ 005938. So you'll recall I referred earlier to the letter written by Sir Mark Sedwill to the NATO Secretary-General in 2018. Mr. Allen's evidence will update the assessments contained in that letter. And there is one important respect in which Mr. Allen's statement goes further than the Sedwill letter. And if we can go to page 6 of the statement, please, at paragraph 25, Mr. Allen makes the following statement. In light of the required seniority under Russian law to approve assassinations of suspected terrorists outside Russia, and that this incident concerned a politically sensitive target, Mr. Skripal was a UK citizen and was targeted on UK soil, it is HMG's view that President Putin authorised the operation. Plainly, sir, we will have further questions for Mr. Allen when he comes to give evidence about that part of his statement. So, finally, there will be evidence relating to the Novichok itself and the bottle that it was discovered in. And that is a separate issue to which I now turn. And I have referred several times now to Novichok, the chemical nerve agent which, according to evidence you will hear, poisoned Sergei and Yulia Skripal, Charlie Rowley and others, and also poisoned and killed Dawn Sturgess. I mentioned at the outset this morning that Novichok is the name given to a class of nerve agents said to have been developed by Russian government agencies in the final years of the Cold War. Many general questions arise about Novichok itself. What is it and how does it work? What understanding is there about when and where this nerve agent was first developed? Is it now, or was it in 2018, outlawed by international treaties? Do any countries hold stocks of it? If so, which? How easy is it to make and to transport? Is it known to have been used anywhere other than Salisbury in recent times? If so, where and by whom? We will address all of those questions. And there are further questions that arise in relation to the particular Novichok that was found by forensic investigators in 2018. On the one hand, the Novichok found in Sergei Skripal's house and car, in places that he and Yulia visited, and in tests of their skin, their clothing and their blood. And on the other hand, the Novichok found in the bottle discovered in Charlie Rowley's house in Amesbury, and in tests of his and Dawn Sturgess's clothes and blood. How similar was the Novichok that was found in Salisbury in March to the Novichok that was found in Amesbury in July? What conclusions can be drawn as to whether the two samples of the toxin were made in the same place, or whether they came from the same batch, or even the same bottle? Again, we will investigate these questions. Similar questions arise, and we will address them in relation to other testing results at various sites in Salisbury and Amesbury, and in particular at the City Stay Hotel in London, where Petrov and Bosharov are known to have stayed in March 2018, and where trace levels of Novichok were found nearly 2 months later. Much of the evidence that we will hear in relation to Novichok will come from government scientists working at the UK Government Defence Science and Technology Laboratory at Porton Down, only a few miles from Salisbury. As we will hear, one of DSTL's functions is to advise UK law enforcement agencies regarding the analysis and identification of hazardous chemical and biological materials. And in that capacity, DSTL scientists provided considerable support to the police investigations into the Skripal and Sturgess poisonings. I referred earlier to the queries that the Russian government has raised publicly about this case. Many of those queries relate to the Novichok. And let me give 3 examples of the types of issues that have been raised by reference to the Russian embassy document that I've already mentioned. I see it's on screen already, INQ 004576. And if we can go to page 19, please. Thank you. So you will see in the middle of the page that the embassy document makes the point that there is an inconsistency between the British government assertion, contained, although not in precisely these words, in the Sedwell letter, that Russia has produced small quantities of Novichoks within the last decade, with the fact that in September 2017, 6 months or so before the Skripals were poisoned, the OPCW, an international organisation of which the UK is a member, certified the full destruction of Russia's chemical weapons. As the embassy document puts it, if the UK had information of Russia producing military-grade chemical agents in contravention of its obligations, one would expect the UK to raise the issue in 2017. They did not. It's also not clear what kind of information Britain possesses and how it has come to the conclusion regarding the purpose of the alleged production. Second, the embassy document raises questions about the source of the Novichok. The Sedwell letter, and if we may go back to it briefly, it's INQ 003070, and it's page 2 that we need. It's page 2 of the Sedwell letter. I'll just read it. So the Sedwell letter asserts that, and the quote is, "It is unlikely that Novichoks," we have it, "it's unlikely that Novichoks could be made and deployed by non-state actors, e.g. a criminal or terrorist group." It's the last sentence of the 3rd paragraph there. That's it. It's unlikely that Novichoks could be made and deployed by non-state actors, e.g. a criminal or terrorist group. Thank you. If true, sir, that would obviously greatly narrow the field for the possible source of the Novichok used in Salisbury. The embassy document, though, and I'm afraid we'll need to go back to it, if we can, please. It's INQ 004576, page 21. The embassy document makes a contrary claim. Thank you. About halfway down page 21, there is the assertion, it is safe to say that any modern chemical laboratory is capable of synthesizing Novichok. It would follow from that that a non-state body could have been responsible for the attack on the Skripals. A further suggestion that is made at various points of the embassy document, including the paragraph immediately below, the one that is currently highlighted, is that the Novichok might have been made at Porton Down itself. So these are all matters that we will investigate in the course of the hearings. The third and final point for now that I wanted to draw your attention to from this document is that the embassy document raises queries about what might be described as the differential impact on those who came into contact with the Novichok. And if we can go to page 22, please. We have it there. The embassy document says, it has never been explained how it was possible for the Skripals to lose consciousness simultaneously several hours after coming into contact with the nerve agent, despite them being persons of different age, gender and body constitution. And then again in the final paragraph, it has never been explained why not a single person providing first aid and further medical assistance to the Skripals ever developed any signs of symptoms of nerve agent poisoning, even if the nature of the poisoning was not known at least for 2 days. So we will carefully explore all the issues that have been raised with the witnesses who are called to give evidence in the coming weeks. And finally, on the topic of Novichok, I add that we will hear evidence not just about the nerve agent that was found inside the perfume bottle, but evidence about the bottle itself and the packaging in which it was discovered. There will be evidence on these matters from a senior official of the company that sells Nina Ricci perfume. He will say that the bottle and packaging are not genuine items, and he will explain how what was found differs from the real thing. And we will see analysis that was undertaken of the plastic packaging in which Charlie Rowley says he found the bottle, and which, according to him, he cut off at the time he gave the bottle to Dawn on the morning of the 30th of June. I've already mentioned this plastic packaging, sir, and if we could see it one more time, it's INQ 004675, yes. That packaging which was recovered from the Muggleton Road flat. We will hear about testing and analysis that was conducted on this packaging that is relevant, amongst other things, to the question of whether the bottle with which Dawn inadvertently poisoned herself was the very same bottle that had been used earlier that year in Salisbury, or whether it had perhaps been an unused reserve bottle. So I move to the penultimate issue that I wish to address you on this morning. How did the bottle come to be in Dawn Sturgess's possession? If you do conclude, on the evidence you hear, that the bottle Dawn Sturgess held in her hands on the morning of the Saturday, the 30th of June, had been brought to Salisbury some 4 months previously, in early March, by Petrov and Bosharov, then it is also necessary to explore the question of what happened to the bottle in the meantime. How did it end up that Saturday morning being given to Dawn by Charlie Rowley with such tragic consequences? This is important not only because it goes to the sequence of events leading to Dawn's death, but also because it informs one aspect of the final issue that I will come to address this morning, that of whether Dawn's death could or should have been prevented. The question of whether the bottle could or should have been found in the clean-up operation that followed the Skripal poisoning depends, obviously, on where it was and how long it stayed there. It is therefore unfortunate that the evidence that we have on this issue is somewhat sparse. The starting point, of course, is with Charlie Rowley himself, who found the bottle and later gave it to Dawn. Unsurprisingly, in the aftermath of the poisoning, and we will recall that Charlie Rowley himself suffered very serious symptoms, he was asked repeatedly, perhaps even too often, for details of when and where he'd found the bottle. Transcripts of these interviews will be put into evidence. As we will see, Charlie Rowley was not able to provide a clear answer to these questions. He initially said that he had no recollection of when or where he'd found the bottle. He subsequently suggested that he may have picked it up off the street in either Amesbury or Salisbury. And later still, he became confident that he had found it shortly before he gave it to Dawn in a bin in the Brown Street car park, a bin that was used by a charity shop on Catherine Street. So we will explore these various scenarios, and quite possibly others, over the coming weeks. However, as will, I imagine, already be apparent, we are not optimistic that we will arrive at a single convincing explanation. The idea that Charlie Rowley may have found the perfume bottle in a bin is plausible in itself. As we shall hear, Mr. Rowley accepts that he's been in the practice of searching for valuable items in certain bins. And the charity shop bin in the Brown Street car park was one of those that he visited. But there is evidence that those bins were emptied regularly. A bottle left in the bin in early March would certainly not have still been there in June, when Mr. Rowley says he found the bottle. Perhaps Mr. Rowley is wrong and he removed the bottle from the bin within a day or so of the Skripal poisoning, perhaps even the same day. But that would mean that he had it in his possession for months longer than he remembered, including a time when he moved house. So there are other factual scenarios to consider, and we will explore all of them with the witnesses, including, we hope, Mr. Rowley, over the course of the hearings. So I now come to the final of the issues that I will address you on. I note the time, and I apologise to everyone in the room. I will only be, if you'll permit me, another 5 or 10 minutes.
If you're 5 or 10 minutes, Mr. O'Connor, I'd prefer you to finish.
Yes.
If you're going to be any longer, we're going to have to break.
I will confine myself to that time.
Right.
So the seventh and final issue that I listed earlier is that of whether the poisoning of Dawn Sturgess could or should have been prevented. There are two separate sub-issues that we will consider under this broad heading of preventability. The first of those sub-issues relates to the work of the police and public health agencies in the aftermath of the Skripal poisoning. Should the bottle have been found in the clean-up operation in and around Salisbury in the weeks that followed the 3rd of March 2018? Plainly, if it had been found and recognised for what it was, then Dawn's death would have been prevented. We will hear evidence that various government agencies were engaged in the clean-up exercise. Consideration was given not just to the general risk posed by known and possible unknown areas of contamination, in particular buildings visited and vehicles used by the Skripals and others who were subsequently contaminated, but also to the specific risk that whatever container had been used to bring the poison to Salisbury might still be in the area, possibly having been discarded in a public space. We must be realistic about what these searches could have been expected to achieve. There was understandable uncertainty as to what, if anything, might be found. And those organising searches also had to take account of the fact that any container that might be found would be highly dangerous, perhaps fatal, to whoever found it. We will hear that protective measures were taken, but this, of course, made the process far more resource-intensive and slow. And as I have mentioned, there is some doubt as to how long the Nina Ricci bottle was in fact available to be found. If, as seems at least possible, Charlie Rowley picked it up within days or even hours of the 3rd of March, there is no sensible possibility that it could have been recovered and made safe by government agencies. There is a further related point. If the authorities were alive to the risk that Novichok might have been discarded in Salisbury, they might, perhaps should, have considered not only conducting reasonable searches for a container, but also alerting the public to this risk and warning them not to pick up any containers or similar objects that weren't theirs. We will examine what, if any, consideration was given to such public health warnings, whether any such warnings were actually given, and whether, in retrospect, this part of the response to the Skripal poisoning could have been improved. The second of the preventability issues is described in the inquiry's provisional list of issues in the following terms: whether the UK authorities took appropriate precautions in early 2018 to protect Mr. Skripal from being attacked. This issue was added to the scope of the investigation by Lady Hallett at the request of the Sturgess family. As Lady Hallett put it in her scope ruling of the 8th of April 2021, quotes, If there was a specific threat to Mr. Skripal of Russian retaliation, the family would wish to know whether any steps were taken to protect him or the public from collateral damage." Close quote. Those representing the Sturgess family have submitted that the inquiry's investigation of this issue should include the intelligence service's knowledge, assessment and decision-making concerning the risks to the Skripals and therefore the public more widely, any protective measures put in place in response and the adequacy of such steps. We suggest that the actions of other organisations will also have to be considered, for example, counter-terrorism police and Wiltshire police. Earlier this year, at your direction, the Sturgess family's representatives identified certain questions relating to this issue of protection that they wished Sergei Skripal to address in a further witness statement. Those issues included whether Mr. Skripal was aware of any risk assessment regarding his personal safety having been carried out by the UK authorities, and if so, what it contained. What his views were regarding what, if any, security measures should have been taken to protect him. Whether he communicated his views to security agencies. Whether periodic reviews were conducted. What, if any, security measures were in fact in place, to his knowledge, in March 2018. Mr. Skripal has now provided a statement in response. I've already referred to the section of his statement that contains his views on who was responsible for the poisoning. Another part of the same statement addresses at some length his security arrangements prior to the poisoning in March 2018. I will read out the relevant passages. Thank you. So we've gone to INQ 006086, it's page 7. And picking up halfway down under the heading Security Arrangements, paragraph 25, after addressing a suggestion in a newspaper article, which he describes as false or based on a misunderstanding, that he had told people his life was in danger before the attack in 2018. Mr. Skripal states, and I'm picking up the final two sentences of paragraph 25, "My life was normal, and I had no information or warning to support such a comment. I was aware of nothing special or different around that time. I do not know specifically which organisations were responsible for my security in Great Britain. I believe the authorities had put some precautions in place, but I'm not aware of all the details. I've been asked whether there were security measures that could and should have been considered in my case. My comments on the list of suggestions presented to me are as follows. A. I do not remember concretely what was covered in discussions about my personal security arrangements, but I believe I was offered protection, including changing my name. It was never suggested that this was a necessary option, and I decided against it. I had received a presidential pardon from the Russian state and wanted to lead as normal a life as possible, including maintaining my personal and family relationships. I did not think, and it was not suggested, that I needed to live in a gated community or a block of flats. Christie Miller Road was a quiet street built for police officers. Several neighbours were ex-police. Residents knew and kept an eye out for each other. I felt quite safe there. I'm not sure what is meant by secure communications networks with regular password changes. I use ordinary commercial devices and software, and this seemed reasonable to me. I did not have a house security alarm or sensor-activated security lights, and I do not remember either of these being raised with me. CCTV was recommended, but I declined this because I did not want to make my house conspicuous or live under surveillance. I did not keep my address secret, and when I visited London and stayed overnight, I registered at a hotel under my own name. I remember a policeman visited me and gave me his number in case I ever needed a point of contact. I do not know what the local police and emergency services more generally were told about my situation. I do not have any insight into scrutiny of visa applications or red flag alerts at UK border controls. I may not be aware of all the security measures that were in place, and I'm not a security expert. When I received advice about my security, I generally followed it. I do not believe I was shown or made aware of the contents of any risk assessment carried out by the authorities, either at the time I came to Great Britain or later. I don't recall being involved in discussions about a risk assessment specifically, or being aware of any formal periodic reviews. I don't recall proposing any additional security measures. I don't believe it was suggested to me that I posed a risk to the UK community, either generally or in relation to poison or other toxic substances. Thank you. Sir, it is obvious that there is much in what Mr. Skripal has said that goes directly to this preventability issue. That is, whether UK authorities took appropriate precautions in early 2018, both to protect Mr. Skripal from being attacked and also to protect the public from the collateral damage of any such attack. Equally obviously, Mr. Skripal's statement raises further questions that demand an answer. To give just a few, which UK organisation or organisations bore responsibility for his safety? Were risk assessments in fact conducted? If so, were they conducted with sufficient thoroughness and regularity? And what measures did they recommend? Were security measures that were considered necessary put in place? And was it appropriate in all the circumstances to allow Mr. Skripal, as appears to have been the case, to decline certain security measures? These are just a few examples. I'm sure that Mr. Mansfield will raise other equally pertinent questions with you. However, at this stage of the analysis, it is necessary to confront an important procedural question, which is whether it's possible to explore these issues in these open hearings, or whether they can only properly be explored in closed. So we well understand the family's desire to explore these factual matters with witnesses during these open sessions. We will of course listen to what Mr. Mansfield has to say later today on this matter, and we will keep an open mind as to how and the extent to which this might be achieved. But our current view is that detailed exploration of these matters must of necessity take place in closed session for the following reasons. In order to engage with the question of what risk Mr. Skripal may or may not have been under, and therefore what precautions should have been taken, it is necessary first to establish his risk profile. Even if he was not a British agent, the fact that he was a former senior GRU officer living in the UK arguably placed him at some risk. Mr. Skripal recognised this himself in the course of his police interviews in 2018, where he said, "I am a very important man of special services. Still now I know a lot of Russian secrets, top secrets. They are really dangerous for Russian special services." But the risk that he faced would obviously have been higher, with an inevitable consequence on the type of protective measures that would have been required if Mr. Skripal was not only a former GRU officer, but also a GRU officer who had assisted British intelligence. In particular, it may be thought, if, as has been suggested, he carried on doing so after his arrival in the UK. These factual matters are essential building blocks towards understanding Mr. Skripal's risk profile, which, as I've said, has to be established before it's possible to get into questions of whether he was provided with sufficient protection. But the effect of your ruling on NCND, to which I've already referred, is that these factual matters must be addressed only in closed session. That, sir, is our understanding of the difficulty in grappling with detailed factual issues regarding Mr. Skripal's protection in these open sessions. You will no doubt wish to reflect further, having heard from Mr. Mansfield. What I would emphasise, sir, finally, is that this difficulty in no way precludes Dawn Sturgess's family, or any other court participant for that matter, from raising factual questions in open that they consider ought to be addressed in closed. Indeed, we would welcome that, since it will assist us to fulfil what we know to be the Sturgess family's desire, that these issues of protection and preventability are fully explored through a combination of the open and closed hearings that you will hold. So that concludes the introduction to the key factual issues that we will explore in evidence over the coming weeks. There are a few procedural matters that I wish to cover, but in particular in light of the indication you gave a few minutes ago, may I suggest that this would be a good moment to pause for lunch?
Yes, well, first of all, we will break now. We'll break until 2:15, please. But it's important that we take all these opening statements this afternoon, so you should all be prepared for us not finishing early this afternoon. All right, 2:15, please, promptly.